The situation is extremely grim in Israel. Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, they fired more than 1,600 rockets into Israel. There have been fatalities in Israel. Now, there has been very strong counter-action, both by the Israeli Air Force, and what we are now being told is there are 83 fatalities in Gaza. More than 400 people have been injured. The apprehension is that this conflict is only set to escalate, with thousands of Israeli troops massed, perhaps, to enter Gaza.
Hamas militants firing one barrage of rockets after another into Israel, targeting civilian areas for the fourth straight day in a sign of escalation of tension and violence along the Gaza Strip. Hamas fired more than 1,600 rockets into Israel, which has resulted in the loss of 7 lives and several injuries. Several Israeli citizens have been forced to rush to bomb shelters, and the Iron Dome rocket defense system has been in action almost continuously, destroying incoming rockets in the air. Israeli security forces hit back, launching a number of airstrikes into the Gaza Strip. Israeli security forces have called it a complex and first-of-its-kind operation, taking out the Hamas leadership and launch pads with pinpoint accuracy.
It's unfortunately escalating, and we have been trying for quite a while to de-escalate the situation. This didn't start today. You know, it started several days ago, and we were trying in Jerusalem. It started in Jerusalem, and we were trying to de-escalate the situation there. But Hamas has determined that it will stir things up and it will make trouble. It's trying to get control of the Palestinian Authority, and this is its way to do it.
The administration on the Gaza Strip claimed 83 lives had been lost, including 17 children in the Israeli airstrikes. More than 480 civilians are said to have been injured. The Israeli Air Force brought down a 6-story residential building in the heart of the Gaza Strip, claiming that the building housed top leadership of Hamas, including its security and intelligence chiefs. Israel also claimed that sufficient time had been given to residents to clear out before the building was taken out. Israel has used precision-guided munitions to target specific buildings in its airstrikes. In a sign of escalating tensions, Israel has now massed thousands of troops, tanks and armored vehicles close to the border with Gaza. Both the United Nations and the United States are closely monitoring the situation and have called for a reduction in tensions. But given the strong statements from both sides, the tension and conflict are only set to escalate. Bureau Report, India Today.
So this situation appears to be worsening. Joining me on the show is Ronie Yedidia Clein, Israel's Deputy Ambassador to India. Ambassador Clein, is the conflict now set to escalate? Are ground troops poised to enter Gaza, ma'am?
Well, I can't tell you exactly because we haven't made the final decision yet, but we are getting ready for any eventuality. And we will, if necessary, if the rocket firing does not stop, then we will in fact have to send in the ground troops. That's something that we would rather not do, but if we don't have a choice, then we will.
What is the end game? Ambassador, at this point of time, what's Israel looking at? Because the barrages, they just seem to continue. 1,600 rockets fired at Israel.
It's actually already over 1,700 rockets as of 1 hour ago. What we simply want is for the rockets to stop. That's our main aim. We don't want to be fired upon by Hamas. We don't want our civilian population to be held hostage by Hamas. We don't want the Palestinian civilian population to be held hostage by Hamas. Hamas is an extremist organization which it does not believe that the state of Israel should exist. It has stated numerous times, including in its own charter, that it wants to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and it doesn't care who gets killed in the way, including its own citizens. You know, 1/3 of the rockets that are being fired out of Gaza don't even make it out of Gaza, and they're falling within the lines of Gaza and killing their own citizens. They don't even care about their own people. If they'd even move their launching apparatus into open fields, which there are plenty of in Gaza, they won't be bringing such harm to their own citizenry.
And yet with those cheap rockets that the Hamas uses, have they been able to, it's a battle of unequals. Israeli armed forces are so strong, state-of-the-art equipment with the Iron Dome, with the best aircraft, and yet Hamas terrorists, as you call them, militants as they call themselves, militants using those cheap rockets, have they been able to pin down the Israeli forces and people, ma'am?
You know, they're not such cheap rockets anymore. When we were talking about previous campaigns, 7 years ago in 2014, maybe then those were cheaper rockets. Today, from what we're seeing from the rockets that are being shot into Israel and fired into Israel, these are not cheap rockets anymore. These are much more expensive rockets. These are rockets that are being invested in by Iran. They are no longer the cheap little Katyusha rockets that used to be fired into the neighboring communities. These are rockets that have the ballistic power to reach Jerusalem. They have the ballistic power to reach the north of Israel. We're not talking about a weak little Hamas anymore. This sort of framing of the situation as if big, strong Israel is facing this tiny little weak, militant grassroots organization, that's not a fair game anymore. That's not the way to frame it anymore. Today we're talking about an organization, it's still a terrorist organization, but it's being funded by Iran, it's being equipped by Iran and its proxies, and the rockets that are coming into Israel are no longer the cheap little Katyushas that used to be shot into Israel.
Ambassador Clein, Israel is being accused of using disproportionate force. First, at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest for Arabs, the holiest, of course, that place for Jews, but, disproportionate force even now in the Gaza Strip, ma'am.
I beg to differ. First of all, in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, in the Temple Mount, as we call it, and I really think that in the name of balance, that it should be called the Temple Mount and Haram al-Sharif. We did our very best in order to de-escalate the situation there. We prevented on one of the most celebratory days of our year, Jerusalem Day, which is the day when we celebrate the reunification of Jerusalem, which had been divided for 19 years before that and is the capital of the Jewish people for 3,000 years. We prevented Jews from going up to the Temple Mount. We stopped the flag march from happening. We we delayed a court case and we did everything possible in order to de-escalate the situation there, and instead of that we got more and more violence. As for what's happening in Gaza, it's not disproportionate. We are doing precision strikes in order to strike at the leadership of Hamas, in order to strike at their infrastructure. We are warning civilian populations in the area that's about to be hit that they are in danger of being hit, and giving them time to get out of the area. I don't agree with your statement that it's disproportionate. We're doing our very best.
Is there an apprehension? Ambassador, that this is escalating on multiple fronts in Gaza, as some of your senior political leaders have been quoted as saying it could also lead to, and it is leading to, clashes within Israel with the minorities. Could this escalate, as some argue, into a civil war kind of a situation within Israel, ma'am?
What's happening in Israel is that small groups of extremists are being extremely vocal, extremely violent on both sides. This is something that the leadership of Israel has condemned, and the police are working to stop. We're talking about small groups on both sides, small groups of extremists, and I don't believe that it will lead into civil war. In fact, today there has been such an uprising against these extremists on both sides. We've seen people coming together in various institutions where they work together, in hospitals and schools and universities, and coming together in order to show the world that they are that there is friendship between Jews and Arabs in Israel. That this is not a civil war.
So what is being done to de-escalate, the situation when it comes to Hamas, the Islamic Jihad? Neither side, we are told, willing to back down at this point of time. Now, would this also impact your relations, improving with some of the Arab world? But could it, once again get back to the older days?
Well, I hope that the fact that we have these new relations with the countries of the Gulf and other parts of the Arab world, Morocco and the UAE and Bahrain, would actually be some sort of a bridge in order to help us to de-escalate the situation with the Palestinians. Hamas is also working against them. Hamas's aim is to destabilize the region, to take over the Palestinian Authority. They started this whole thing when the Palestinian Authority, for reasons not at all connected to Israel, canceled the elections there. Yes. And they apparently thought that they would be able to win these elections. I don't know if that's true or not, but the fact that the Palestinian Authority decided to cancel them, that's what caused them to start all of this violence and firing up the region. Because they're afraid that the Palestinian Authority will go in the tracks of the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan, who very wisely realized that there's no future in continuous warfare with Israel. The future lies in peace and
Ambassador
in having good relations and in doing business together and opening borders and being able to work together and live together.
Sincerely hope the situation calms down. We'll track that story very closely. But for the moment, many thanks for joining us here on India Today. I now want to cut across to India Today's executive editor, Sandeep Unnithan, joining me for more on this. Sandeep, militarily, when you talk about Israel, perhaps the best armed forces or one of the best in the world with their equipment, with their training, with their tactics to deal with a situation like this. And Hamas, as the Deputy Ambassador was just telling us, their weapons much better than what they were during the last conflict, 2014. But have they, in a sense, been able to, bring out some of the inadequacies of the Iron Dome? Or it's not possible to stop every rocket that's coming in? Most have been stopped.
Well, Gaurav, firstly, Hamas is an irregular force. I mean, it doesn't play by the rules. And there have been various examples in previous conflicts in 2014 where they have actually launched rockets from within residential areas and schools just to attract counter-battery fire so that, the death toll goes up and Israel can be blamed for causing collateral damage. That's one part of the story. The other is, of course, the Iron Dome system itself. And that is it's a feat of engineering. I've not seen it work. I have seen the system. It's been displayed to us when we visited Israel, and it is an amazing system. It's almost a one of a kind in the world. It's a dual purpose system. It's what's called a CRAM, as a counter rocket artillery mortar system, and also a very short range air defense system. It's got a range of something like 7 to 70 kilometers. It can track and allocate targets, and it doesn't have to shoot down every single rocket that's coming there. So what it does is it allocates. The system is highly automated, and it allocates targets based on where the rockets are headed. If they're headed towards civilian areas, for instance, that's when these automated missiles kind of spring out of the ground and go and track them and destroy these rockets. Now, this system is basically, it's about 10 years old, and it's being constantly refined, and it gives Israel a very high level of protection for its citizens. I mean, we all know the fact that it values the life of every single citizen of it. So this Iron Dome has actually been evolved over the last couple of years, and it's now come down to a point where it's a very smart system, as one of the developers said, that what you see, those Star Wars kind of images it's like an algorithm in operation, that the missile, the system tracks and targets the most dangerous of the rockets which are headed in their way. And of course, there has been a constant aim on the part of Hamas to improve
and with their snooping devices,
of their
the
rockets.
Israeli security forces also pinpointing the exact flow, the exact window where they perceive the adversary to be, taking out the leadership of Hamas and employing Air Force to do that. I mean, I want our viewers to see those images of that building, that 6-storied residential building that's coming down. And Sandeep, I believe multiple such facilities have been targeted. Sandeep.
Yes, indeed, Gaurav. And we believe that was taken out by an F-16 firing an air-to-ground precision missile. And the Israeli Defense Forces, as you mentioned, are one of the most capable in the region, and they have the ability to fire pop a cruise missile into a window, as you can see in that footage there. And this is what they've been doing increasingly to, take out targets with, causing minimal collateral damage. And that is a very, very important thing, because, as I mentioned earlier, Hamas, one of the reasons that it actually launches its rockets from within civilian areas and residential areas is to attract Israeli counter-battery fire, so that they can actually go and say that, look, Israel is targeting civilian, residential areas, and it's causing unacceptable damage. So this
Sandeep,
is the kind
in the past,
irregular warfare that Hamas
there's been conflict
waging.
even in the past, 2014 being the most recent example. But how is 2021 different from the past, given the fact that this time, once again, while the ground forces prepare to go in, is there an end game that Israel has in mind?
Well, Gaurav, as the Deputy Ambassador mentioned, that the fact is that there is a ground component that's poised there, and that is the kind of weapon of last resort that Israel would resort to in case these rocket attacks don't stop. Because let's not forget that there are only so many rockets that Israel has to, missiles that Israel has to fire against these Hamas rockets that are coming in. And they're literally coming in by the thousands. I mean, you're looking at something like 16 or 1700 rockets, and they are increasing in their capabilities, as in they're being fired at flatter trajectories, which makes it difficult for for the Iron Dome system to pick it up. In future, they could be, looking at ballistic trajectories, even, longer ranged missiles. But Israel, of course, reserves the right to respond to this situation as it sees fit. And, one can only hope that this situation doesn't escalate beyond a point, Gaurav.
And we'll be tracking that story very closely. Sandeep, for the moment, many thanks for joining me. That is all I have time for on India First this evening. Many thanks for watching. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.